"Where are you taking me, sir?" said the frightened boy when a suspicious man pulled his hand. But a girl from the street saw that the boy was the son of a millionaire, so she grabbed a knife and… On a bustling Thursday afternoon in New York City, the sidewalks of Manhattan were packed with people moving like currents in a restless sea. Among the ocean of faces and business suits, a small figure stood out, not because of noise or panic, but because of the stillness he held amid the chaos. Ethan Miller, 8 years old, with neatly combed blonde hair and a tailored navy blue blazer too crisp for playtime, stood alone on the sidewalk near the corner of Lexington and 59th Street. His eyes scanned the crowd, uncertain and wide, lips pressed together in a failed attempt not to cry. He clutched the handle of a sleek leather backpack that looked newer than half the cars driving past. The man who had been assigned to escort him from the private school to his family's black SUV was nowhere to be seen. Ethan had lost sight of him just 2 minutes earlier when they'd stopped at the crosswalk. The man had turned for a phone call, and Ethan, distracted by a street performer's music, had wandered 2 steps too far, and just like that, the crowd swallowed him. A few feet away, half hidden behind a vending machine and a pile of trash bags, Jasmine Carter watched. 17, thin from months of uncertain meals, and wrapped in a faded olive coat that no longer zipped up properly, she blended into the scenery like someone the city had forgotten. Her sneakers were worn, mismatched laces dragging as she shifted her weight from foot to foot. She had noticed the boy the moment he stopped. Not many 8-year-olds stood still like that unless they were waiting for someone, or hoping someone would find them. She didn't move closer at first. People got lost in New York every day, and Jasmine had long since trained herself to mind her own business. But something about the boy kept drawing her eye. Maybe it was the way he didn't cry or scream. Maybe it was the way he kept glancing over his shoulder like he was trying to remember what direction he'd come from. Or maybe it was because, despite being clearly out of place, no one else seemed to be paying him any attention. Adults streamed past without slowing down. One woman even bumped into his shoulder with her shopping bag and didn't look back. And then came the man. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Wearing a dark, nondescript jacket zipped all the way up to his neck, even though the weather didn't call for it. His jeans were clean, but his shoes were scuffed. Jasmine noticed his eyes first, how they scanned the street before settling on Ethan. He moved with purpose, cutting through the crowd like someone late for a meeting. But when he knelt in front of the boy, his body language shifted. His shoulders relaxed, and he reached out with one hand, palm up. Jasmine couldn't hear what he said, but she saw Ethan flinch, then look around again. His small hand hovered in the air. The man didn't wait. He took it. Jasmine straightened, instincts flaring. She didn't know the boy. Didn't know the man. But something was wrong. Ethan didn't look reassured, he looked scared. She stepped out from behind the vending machine, careful not to make a scene yet. The man was talking again, now more animated, pulling slightly at the boy's arm. That's when it happened. Ethan's voice was soft, but it cut through the crowd around them like a whisper in a church. "Where are you taking me, sir?" A woman walking past slowed. A man carrying coffee turned his head. Jasmine froze, her heart pounding. The boy hadn't screamed, hadn't cried for help, but that sentence was louder than any alarm. The man didn't answer. He just tightened his grip on the child's wrist and began to move, more forcefully now. Jasmine's hand reached into her coat pocket. The knife was small, just 3 inches of rusted metal with a plastic grip. She'd never used it before. Not for anything serious. Just a piece of protection her older cousin had handed her years ago when the shelters got too full and the nights too dangerous. Jasmine had always hoped she wouldn't need it. But now, she gripped it like it was the only thing tethering her to the moment. She stepped into the man's path. "Hey," she said sharply, her voice louder than she meant. "Where are you going with him?" The man blinked. His expression changed, just for a second. First irritation, then surprise, then a smile too calm to be genuine. "He's my nephew," he said evenly. "I'm taking him home." Jasmine didn't budge. She looked at Ethan. "Is that true?" Ethan didn't answer. His eyes flicked between her and the man. He opened his mouth, closed it, then looked down. Jasmine stepped closer. Her fingers tightened around the knife inside her pocket. "What's his name?" "Excuse me?" the man asked. "If he's your nephew," Jasmine said, voice low now, almost a whisper, "then tell me his name." The man hesitated. In that heartbeat of silence, something shifted. A woman nearby had stopped fully now, phone in hand. A cab driver leaned out of his window. Jasmine heard the beginnings of murmurs spreading through the crowd. Then the man released the boy's wrist. He turned, quick and smooth, disappearing into the moving bodies before anyone else could react. Ethan took one step toward Jasmine and collapsed against her side, shaking. She didn't know what she had just gotten herself into. But she knew one thing for sure. That man was not taking the boy anywhere. The crowd that had briefly paused returned to motion like a wave recoiling from the shore. Jasmine remained rooted in place, arms around Ethan, who clung to her jacket with small, trembling fingers. For a moment, neither of them spoke. He was still shaking against her ribs, and she could feel the panic still raw in his breaths, short, shallow, unsure. She loosened her grip just enough to look down at him. "Are you hurt?" Ethan shook his head slowly, without lifting it. He didn't cry. His silence was more unsettling than sobs would have been. "You're safe now," she said, trying to believe it herself. A woman with a baby stroller approached them cautiously. "I called the police. They're on their way," she said, eyes flicking between Jasmine and Ethan. "Do you know this boy?" Jasmine opened her mouth to explain but stopped. She didn't know Ethan, and admitting that to a stranger might only make things worse. Still, her hesitation didn't go unnoticed. "He was being grabbed," she said firmly. "I stepped in. More people were looking now. A teenage girl across the street filmed them on her phone. A man in a business suit whispered something to another passerby. Jasmine could feel the weight of 100 eyes, not just on Ethan, but on her, her coat, her dirt-caked sneakers, her face. People who never looked her way were suddenly staring like she had stepped out of a burning building. Then the sirens arrived. 2 NYPD cruisers pulled up to the curb within seconds of each other. Uniformed officers stepped out quickly, scanning the area. The crowd parted as they approached. One of them, a lean man with a radio clipped to his shoulder, spotted Ethan. "Is he the kid?" Jasmine nodded as Ethan turned into her side again. "He was almost taken." The officer gestured. "Let's get you both out of this street." She followed without protest. Ethan's hand never left hers. They were led into the back of the first cruiser, not cuffed, not threatened, but certainly watched. The second officer, younger, soft-spoken, tried to coax some answers from Ethan. Jasmine stayed silent, listening. "Hey, buddy, what's your name?" Ethan mumbled something inaudible. "Can you say that again?" "Ethan," the boy finally said. "Ethan Miller." Jasmine's heart skipped. That name wasn't unfamiliar. Not in this city. She looked at him more carefully now. His blazer had a subtle embroidery near the collar. MSA, a private academy on the Upper East Side, known for being both elite and fiercely protective of its students. The officer froze for half a second. "Your last name's Miller? Like Benjamin Miller?" Ethan nodded once. Jasmine didn't understand the gravity yet, but the way the officers exchanged looks made it clear, this wasn't just any lost boy. The name meant something. Something big. Within minutes, a call came through the officer's radio. He nodded and leaned into the cruiser window. "We're taking you both down to the station. They'll want to talk to you there." The ride was quiet. Ethan curled against the car door, looking out at the blur of passing buildings. Jasmine kept her eyes ahead, hands in her lap, knife still hidden deep in her coat. She didn't mention it. Not yet. At the station, they were separated. Ethan was taken to a quieter, carpeted room down a hallway she wasn't allowed to enter. She was left in a worn waiting area, half the ceiling lights flickering. A vending machine buzzed in the corner. The cold metal chair beneath her made her legs cramp, but she didn't dare stretch or get up. 2 officers had already asked her basic questions, taken her name, Jasmine Carter, and then disappeared behind closed doors. It had been almost an hour. Her stomach grumbled. She hadn't eaten since the day before, just half a granola bar and tap water. But she ignored it. She was too busy playing everything back in her mind. The man's grip. Ethan's face. The tension in the air when the name, Miller, was spoken. She leaned back, restless. No one had told her anything since she gave her account. They had taken her knife without a word. One of the officers had spotted the handle when she sat down and asked her to hand it over. She did, reluctantly. The door opened suddenly, and 2 men in plain clothes walked in. Not uniforms. Suits. But not the crisp, tailored kind. Their jackets looked too tight at the shoulders, like they'd been thrown on in a hurry. The older one had a thick file in his hand and tired eyes. The younger had a tablet and a holstered weapon barely hidden beneath his blazer. They sat across from her without introduction. Jasmine Carter, the older man began, flipping through the folder. 17 years old. No fixed address. Several citations for loitering. 2 minor theft charges, dropped. 1 arrest for trespassing, also dropped. She raised an eyebrow. Is this about me or about what just happened? He closed the folder, slowly. That depends. Tell me again what you saw. I already told 2 of your officers. Now you're telling us, the younger one said, voice flat. Jasmine clenched her jaw but repeated the story, focusing on details. The man's jacket. His grip. Ethan's words. She mentioned the hesitation, the fake claim of being his uncle. She described his face, medium brown skin, short dark hair, clean-shaven, early 30s, maybe taller than 6 feet. The older man scribbled notes. When she finished, he asked, did he mention any names? No. Did he seem to be waiting for the boy, or was it random? I don't know, she admitted. He walked straight up to him like he knew. The younger man typed something quickly. Do you know who Ethan Miller is? Not until he said his name. Do you know who Benjamin Miller is? I've heard the name, she said. Rich guy. Owns stuff. That's it. The older man leaned forward. Let me be clear. That boy you saved? He's the only son of one of the most powerful men in the country. If something had happened to him. Jasmine's voice cut in. But it didn't. Because I was there. Silence stretched. Then the younger man asked, why did you intervene? She stared at him. Because he was a kid. Alone. Scared. Do I need a better reason? They didn't answer. Just made a few more notes. Minutes later, they left without explanation. Jasmine sat there, unsure if she was in trouble or being thanked. The limbo stretched into another hour. No food. No updates. Just a buzzing vending machine and flickering lights. Then, finally, the door opened again. A woman in her 40s, smartly dressed and holding a notepad, stepped in. She smiled, genuinely, and extended her hand. My name is Elise Harmon. I'm with Child Services. I just spoke with Ethan. He's resting now. Jasmine didn't take the hand. Elise nodded, not offended, and sat down. I just wanted to thank you. Whatever your reasons were, you kept him safe. I didn't do it for thanks. I believe you, Elise said. Still, people don't always step in. Especially not people in your position. Jasmine shifted. What happens now? Elise paused, measuring her words. You'll be free to go soon. But I wanted you to know something. Ethan said this wasn't the first time someone tried to approach him this week. Jasmine frowned. What? He mentioned someone at school. Different man. Same feeling. Said he told his bodyguard, but nothing changed. Why wouldn't his family say anything? Jasmine asked. Elise gave a tired sigh. You're asking the right questions. But no more answers came. And in that moment, Jasmine felt it, the cold, creeping suspicion that this wasn't over. The sun had already set by the time Jasmine stepped out of the station. The city felt colder than she remembered, though the forecast hadn't changed. She adjusted her coat, the zipper still broken, and shoved her hands into her pockets out of habit, forgetting for a moment that the knife was no longer there. She hadn't asked for it back. It didn't feel like hers anymore. A low hum of traffic and neon flicker from nearby storefronts reminded her she was still in the heart of Manhattan. Just a block away, tourists moved in herds and office workers spilled out of bars, laughing too loud for the hour. But on the police station steps, it was quiet. She stood there for a few seconds, not knowing where to go. No one had offered her a ride. No one had asked if she had a place to sleep. Elise had thanked her, again, in a soft voice before disappearing into a hallway with Ethan's name on the door. The detectives hadn't said a word since their last round of questions. And no one, not a single officer, had told her what would happen next. She started walking. Past the sushi place on the corner, through the alley behind a shuttered bakery, and down 2 more blocks until she reached the overpass where she sometimes slept. A few familiar faces nodded as she passed: Nico, the busker with a crooked guitar, Shonda, who watched bags for a few dollars, but no one stopped her. The cold tonight wasn't just in the air. It was in her chest, thick and unmoving. When she sat down on the blanket she'd tucked behind a pipe 3 days ago, her legs gave out with more weight than usual. She pulled the coat tighter around her and leaned against the concrete wall. Her thoughts kept circling the station. Ethan's silence. Elise's warning. The way the officers had exchanged glances every time she said the name Miller. There was something they weren't saying. Something she wasn't supposed to know. And yet, despite everything, despite her exhaustion, despite the tremor still in her hands, Jasmine felt it, the pull. Not curiosity. Not even justice. It was something else. A knot in her gut that wouldn't let go. She didn't like loose ends. And right now, Ethan Miller was one very dangerous loose end. The next morning, she woke early to the sound of someone arguing with a delivery driver near the bakery. Her stomach was empty, her mouth dry. She got up slowly, stretching stiff limbs, and made her way to the public library 2 neighborhoods away. It wasn't open yet, but she waited. At 9 o'clock sharp, the doors swung open and she slipped into the warmth. She didn't go for books. She went straight to the public-use computers. Typing Benjamin Miller, New York, into the search bar brought up hundreds of results. News articles. Business profiles. Awards. Lawsuits. Photos. He was everywhere. Founder and CEO of Miller Industries. Net worth estimated at over $9 billion. Holdings in tech, energy, real estate. Known philanthropist. Political donor. Occasional interview guest on late-night TV. And there, in one of the sidebar stories, was a photo of Ethan. The boy stood next to his father at a gala event, wearing a tiny tuxedo, holding a gold plaque. The caption read, "Father-Son Award at the Future Leaders Foundation Gala." Jasmine stared at the boy's face for a long moment. So small. So clean and protected. He didn't belong in her world, and yet their paths had crossed, violently, and now she couldn't look away. She scrolled deeper. An article from 2 months ago caught her eye. Miller Industries had recently secured a controversial government contract, beating out several competitors. The deal had been challenged in court, accusations of bribery, influence peddling, insider interference. The lawsuit was dismissed. Quietly. No further coverage. Then, another piece, an exposé on internal whistleblowers. An anonymous former employee claimed the company had deep-rooted surveillance protocols, including tracking employees' families and pressuring rivals using private intelligence. Jasmine leaned back. This wasn't about one boy. She logged off and left the library, heart pounding harder than she expected. Her breath fogged in the morning air. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for. But now she was sure of one thing. Whoever had tried to grab Ethan yesterday hadn't done it randomly. She made her way to a shelter near 7th Avenue. Not to sleep. To talk to someone. Jared, the guy who ran the intake desk, knew everyone. He worked there part-time, had friends in weird corners of the city, people who could find a name from a blurry photo or get a phone number that wasn't listed anywhere. When she walked in, Jared glanced up from his clipboard. "Carter. You look like hell." "Feel like it too," she muttered. "I need a favor." He raised an eyebrow. "And here I thought you only came around when we had leftover pizza." She sat on the arm of the worn-out couch near his desk. "You know people. People who keep their ears to the ground." "I do," he said cautiously. "What are you chasing?" "Nothing illegal. I just want to know something. About someone." Jared studied her. He was used to people asking for favors, money, a couch to crash on, an alibi. But there was something sharp in her expression today. Something restless. "You got a name?" "Yeah," she said. "David Langston. I think he works security for Miller." Jared nodded slowly, then tapped his phone a few times. "Give me a few hours." Jasmine didn't wait at the shelter. She walked. Thought. Picked up a cheap sandwich from a street cart and ate it while sitting on a bench in Central Park. Every passing child reminded her of Ethan. Every dark coat in her peripheral vision made her tense. When Jared finally texted, it was short, "Meet me. Now." She hurried back. He was outside, pacing. "You didn't hear this from me," he said, without greeting. "Langston used to be NYPD. Left the force under weird circumstances. Something internal, never went public. Got picked up by a private firm that handles high-risk corporate clients. That's how he ended up with Miller." Jasmine narrowed her eyes. "What kind of weird?" "Someone went missing," Jared said. "During a sting. Langston was on the scene. No charges. But he left a month later. Rumor is, he was paid to stay quiet." She swore under her breath. Jared held up a hand. "That's all I got. I don't want my name near this." "I get it. Whatever you're digging into," he added, "be careful. Miller has a long reach." Jasmine left with her mind spinning. She didn't know the whole picture yet. But pieces were falling into place. Langston wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a fixer. The kind of man you called when you didn't want law enforcement involved. The kind of man who could make a problem disappear. Ethan had nearly disappeared. And now Jasmine was part of this mess, whether she wanted to be or not. That night, back under the overpass, she didn't sleep. Instead, she opened the wrinkled notebook she kept in her backpack and wrote 3 things in block letters. Who wanted Ethan? Why now? What does David Langston know? She underlined the last question twice. Tomorrow, she would find out. The morning air was heavy with the smell of rain that hadn't yet come. Jasmine stood across the street from Miller Tower, a 30-story glass structure looming above Midtown, guarded by a wide plaza and 2 men in black suits with discreet earpieces. From a distance, the building could have passed for any high-end corporate headquarters, but Jasmine knew better. Behind those mirrored windows were people who made decisions that never touched the ground, insulated from the consequences of their own power. And somewhere inside that fortress was David Langston. She wasn't there to break in. She wasn't reckless. But she needed to be close. To watch. To wait. Across the street, she leaned against a hot dog cart that wasn't open yet, pretending to scroll through her phone. Her eyes stayed on the revolving doors, watching who entered, who exited. Langston hadn't shown yet. She'd memorized his face the night before using a photo Jared had found: stern features, square jaw, a man who didn't smile often. The kind of man who could stand next to danger without blinking. 2 hours passed. Then, at precisely 9:45, he appeared. Black coat. Black slacks. Black leather gloves despite the mild weather. He didn't speak to the guards. He didn't scan an ID. The doors opened for him like they knew his weight, and he vanished inside without hesitation. Jasmine exhaled slowly, then stepped back into the flow of foot traffic. She didn't have a plan, not yet, but she wasn't leaving either. She circled the block twice, checking for cameras, familiarizing herself with exits. There was a parking garage on the adjacent street, security cameras mounted high but with blind spots near the back ramp. An alley ran parallel to the north wall of the tower, lined with dumpsters and a service door chained shut. She noted it all. Not because she intended to break in, but because she might need to run one day, and she needed to know where to go when that happened. By noon, she was back near the public library, warming her hands over a grate. The city was tense. She could feel it in the way people moved, fast, impatient, irritable. No one made eye contact. No one wanted to stop. Even Jasmine felt like she was part of some race she didn't sign up for. Her phone buzzed. The number was unfamiliar. She hesitated, then answered. "Is this Jasmine Carter?" The voice was male. Deep. Not harsh, but not casual either. "Who's asking?" "My name is Officer Kyle Moreno. I'm the one who spoke with Ethan this morning." Jasmine straightened. "Is he okay?" "He's safe. But I think we need to talk." She didn't answer right away. "You're not in trouble," he added. "In fact, it's because of what you did that we're taking this seriously." Jasmine glanced around, her instincts bristling. "Where?" "There's a cafe near Bryant Park." "La Rue." "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Your name won't be mentioned. You'll just be another customer." She hung up without agreeing but found herself heading in that direction anyway. The cafe was small and dim, with dark green booths and gold-trimmed menus. No music. Just the occasional hiss from the espresso machine and the hum of quiet conversation. Officer Moreno was seated in the back, dressed in plain clothes, no badge visible, no gun in sight. He nodded when she entered, but didn't wave. She sat across from him. "I appreciate you coming," he said. "I haven't said anything yet." He smiled faintly. "Fair. I'll make it quick." She studied him. Early 40s. Neatly kept beard. Tired eyes, but sharp. "We've been reviewing security footage from the day you stepped in," he began. "The man who grabbed Ethan, we haven't ID'd him yet." Facial recognition came up blank. "That almost never happens." "So he's a ghost," she muttered. "Not exactly. Ghosts don't show up in multiple camera angles and then vanish between blocks like smoke. This guy was good. Professional. Like military? Possibly. Or private sector. Which brings me to Langston." Jasmine stiffened. Moreno caught the shift in her body language. "You've been digging." She didn't deny it. "Langston's not your concern," he continued. "Which is exactly why I'm talking to you now. I want to make something very clear. Whatever's happening around the Millers is going to get worse before it gets better. And if you keep asking questions, you're going to find yourself on the wrong side of someone's cleanup operation. I didn't ask for this." "No, you didn't. But you're in it now." He slid something across the table. A folded slip of paper. "What's this?" "Name of a contact. Reporter. Quiet, reliable. If you find anything solid, you give it to her. Not to a blog. Not to social media. Understand?" She nodded slowly. Moreno stood, preparing to leave. "And Jasmine, if anyone approaches you, says they're from the Millers, from security, whatever, don't believe them until you call me first. Save my number. Then he was gone. She pocketed the paper and left the cafe 10 minutes later, head low, heart racing. She was being watched. Maybe not right now. But someone would come, eventually. Someone always came. By dusk, she was back near the overpass, but she didn't settle in. She waited. At 7:30, a car pulled up. Black. Tinted windows. Quiet engine. It didn't park. Just idled. Jasmine took one step into the shadows. Watched. Waited. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Slim build. Suit. No visible badge. He looked around, then moved toward the sidewalk with purpose. Jasmine Carter, he called, voice practiced. She didn't answer. I'm here on behalf of Mr. Miller. He would like to speak with you. Privately. She said nothing. The man took another step. There's a thank you in it for you. A real one. Not just words. We can offer housing. Food. Education. A clean slate. She stepped into the light just enough for him to see her face. Where's the boy? He blinked. Ethan, she said. Where is he? With his family. Safe. And David Langston? The man hesitated. Why does that matter? Jasmine smiled, tight and without humor. Because if you're offering me safety, I need to know who I'm being kept safe from. The man didn't answer. She turned and walked away. Behind her, the car remained still for several minutes before pulling back into the dark. That night, no one slept well. Jasmine knew something was coming. She just didn't know yet from which direction it would arrive. Jasmine arrived at the station just after 10 the next morning, a cautious glance thrown over her shoulder as she stepped through the glass doors. Inside, the atmosphere was subdued, phones ringing, officers speaking in clipped tones, the low hum of controlled urgency. She moved toward the front desk, unsure what exactly had drawn her back here after everything. But something hadn't settled. A feeling she couldn't shake. Before she could speak, a uniformed officer waved her toward a bench along the wall. Someone's coming for you. She didn't ask how they knew she was coming. Less than 2 minutes later, a woman in her late 30s emerged from the corridor. Her heels clicked softly against the tile. Shoulder-length hair pulled back, a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. Jasmine remembered her from the other night, Elise Harmon, the child services agent who'd spoken to Ethan. Elise offered a tight smile. I hoped you'd come back. I didn't say I would. No, Elise replied, but something told me you might not be done. They stepped into a private conference room at the back of the station. Neutral walls, a single window half covered by blinds, and a faint smell of old coffee. Elise set the folder on the table and took a seat across from Jasmine. I didn't bring you here to ask more questions, she said. Not yet, anyway. I just thought you might want to hear something. Jasmine leaned back, arms crossed. I'm listening. Elijah Porter, Elise began. That's the name of the man who tried to take Ethan. The name meant nothing to Jasmine, at least, not at first. He's not in the system. No priors, no address, no employment history. But we pulled a facial match from the old files, interdepartmental records, not the public ones. Porter used to be in private security. Worked overseas in hostile zones. Vanished 5 years ago. Jasmine narrowed her eyes. Vanished how? Last seen boarding a private flight out of Morocco. No record of arrival anywhere else. A ghost, until he shows up on a street in New York grabbing the son of a billionaire. Jasmine said nothing, but her thoughts churned. Something was building here, layers that kept folding in on themselves. Porter wasn't just a kidnapper. He was planted. Sent. Someone had paid him to get close. I can't prove it, Elise continued, but I think someone inside Miller's security detail tipped him off. Langston, Jasmine said quietly. Elise didn't answer immediately. She flipped open the folder and pulled out a document. This is a log from the Miller residence. It lists every visitor, employee, and contractor who entered the property in the past month. We had to fight to get it, but it finally came through this morning. Jasmine scanned the names, dates, timestamps. Then she saw it. 3 days before the incident, at 2:35 in the morning, private contractor, clearance override, authorized by D. Langston. No name attached. Jasmine sat back in her chair. Who the hell shows up at that hour? Exactly. Elise leaned forward, her voice lower. I've seen a lot of internal systems. This one's too clean. Too edited. Someone went through this file before we ever got it. Which means someone knew we'd come looking. Jasmine's pulse quickened. So why give it to you at all? To make it look like they're cooperating. It's theater. Controlled transparency. Enough to suggest openness, but not enough to reveal the truth. And Miller? Jasmine asked. Does he know? If he does, he's not acting like it. We've had zero direct contact. Everything comes through Langston. Jasmine clenched her fists. They're hiding something. Yes, Elise agreed. And I think they're scared of what you saw. That afternoon, Jasmine returned to the library. Not to search for more about Benjamin Miller, she already knew that would lead to curated headlines and praise pieces. Instead, she dug deeper into David Langston. She found no recent interviews, no personal records. But she stumbled on an obscure legal document filed during his time with the NYPD, an internal report mentioning an incident involving failure to disclose location of a protected witness. The details were sealed. But the implication was clear: Langston had a history of looking the other way. She printed the report and added it to the growing folder in her backpack. As the city shifted into evening, Jasmine sat on a bench near the Queensboro Bridge, the folder on her lap. She wasn't just involved anymore, she was invested. And the more she uncovered, the more she realized this wasn't just about Ethan. He was the center of it, yes, but the danger radiated far beyond him. A sudden vibration in her pocket pulled her from thought. She checked the screen. A text message. Unknown number. You need to stop. That was all. No name. No signature. Just the warning. She stared at the message for a long minute, then deleted it. But not before copying the number onto a torn scrap of paper. She wasn't going to run. Not now. The next morning, Jasmine returned to the police station, but not alone. A local journalist named Lucas Grant met her outside the building. She had contacted him the night before using the number Officer Moreno had given her. Grant wasn't flashy. He didn't work for the Times or one of the cable news networks. But he had a reputation for chasing truth into uncomfortable places, and not backing down. He wore a worn blazer and carried a voice recorder he didn't bother to hide. "You've got something?" he asked. "I've got pieces. Let's hear them." Inside a side room of the precinct, she laid everything out. The security log. The photo of Langston with the timestamp. The ghost named Elijah Porter. The strange visit at 2:35 in the morning. Grant listened without interrupting, occasionally scribbling notes in a battered notebook. When she finished, he looked up. "You think Langston's working with whoever's trying to take the kid?" "I think he's more than that," Jasmine said. "I think he's coordinating it. Or at least letting it happen." Grant leaned back in his chair. "That's a dangerous accusation." "Then prove me wrong." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pocketed the log sheet. "Let me make a few calls." As he stood, Jasmine asked, "If this goes public, what happens to Ethan?" Grant's expression darkened. "Depends on who controls the story first." That evening, Jasmine didn't return to the overpass. Instead, she found a quiet corner behind a closed cafe in Brooklyn, curled up with her bag beneath the stairwell. She didn't sleep. Not really. Her thoughts raced too fast for rest. And just after midnight, her phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a single image. Blurry, taken from what looked like a security feed. Ethan, in a hallway she didn't recognize, standing beside a man just out of frame. The boy looked tense. Afraid. The caption read, "You were right." There was no name attached. But Jasmine didn't need one. She knew the next move was hers. The image stayed on Jasmine's mind long after the screen went dark. She hadn't saved it. Whoever sent it had used a timed app that erased the message seconds after it was viewed, but the image was burned into her memory. Ethan, standing in a hallway with beige walls, faint security lights above him, and a shadow to his right. He wasn't restrained. He wasn't crying. But there was a fear in his stance that Jasmine couldn't unsee. A stiffness that didn't belong to a child who felt protected. She stayed hidden for the rest of the night, behind a locked service gate near a shuttered pet store in Brooklyn. The walls were cold. The air tasted of metal. But it was quiet. For now. She didn't risk turning her phone back on. Not yet. By morning, the sky had the grayish hue of filtered sunlight through pollution. Jasmine stepped out into the street with her hood up and headed toward the nearest public terminal she knew, an out-of-service MetroCard kiosk where she sometimes sat and thought. This time, she didn't sit. She crouched behind it and powered on her phone with trembling hands. There were 2 voicemails from numbers she didn't recognize. She didn't listen. Instead, she texted Officer Moreno a single line, "He's not safe." No reply. But the message went through. By 10:30, she was outside the newsroom where Lucas Grant worked, a modest brick building near Union Square with a single-letter logo stenciled on the glass. She didn't expect him to be there. But as soon as she stepped inside, a receptionist pointed her toward the back. "He said you might come." Lucas was leaning over a table cluttered with printouts, 2 laptops open, headphones around his neck. His usual worn blazer was draped over the back of his chair. The screen to his left showed a paused video of a man in a hallway. For a moment, Jasmine thought it was the same footage she had received, but no, this was different. Clearer. More recent. She stepped closer. The man in the video was David Langston. He was walking quickly through a side corridor, glancing over his shoulder once before slipping into a restricted area. The timestamp was from the night before. "Where is that?" Jasmine asked. "A hotel in Midtown," Lucas replied. "Private floor. Rented under a holding company that traces back to one of Miller's shell accounts. Langston was there for less than 20 minutes. No official reason for the visit. No logs. No witnesses." Jasmine stared at the screen. "Ethan? No sign. But there's a strong chance he's being moved between private locations. No school appearances. No press. That's not protection. That's isolation." She didn't say what she was thinking, that the image she received may have been from that exact building, moments before or after this footage was taken. Lucas turned back to her, his tone shifting. "You need to know something. I got a call last night. A man claiming to represent Miller's legal team. Said if I run anything connecting the company's security team to criminal activity, I'll face immediate injunction. Defamation. Career destruction. They're scared," Jasmine said. "They're organized," he corrected. "And they're used to winning." She took a breath. "I want to go to that hotel." Lucas frowned. "That's not smart." "You think I care about smart? I think you care about Ethan. And that's exactly why they'll use you." She crossed her arms. "Then help me make sure they can't." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll get you a name at the front desk. They won't recognize you, not yet. But don't stay long. Don't confront anyone. Just look. Then leave." 2 hours later, Jasmine was in a hotel elevator, rising past the 20th floor with a stolen housekeeping badge clipped to her coat. The badge didn't unlock any doors, but it made people look the other way. The elevator chimed. Floor 26. The corridor was silent, carpet too thick for her footsteps to make a sound. She walked slowly, glancing at each door. Some had "Do Not Disturb" signs. Others were unmarked. Then, halfway down the hall, she saw it, a tray outside a door with untouched food, and a faint sound from inside. Not voices. Not footsteps. Just the low hum of a television. She stepped closer, listening. No movement. She leaned toward the peephole, not to look in, but to place her ear against the wood. A voice. Soft. Male. Could have been Langston. She couldn't be sure. She didn't linger. Back in the elevator, she removed the badge and tucked it into her sleeve. No one stopped her. By the time she exited onto the street, her pulse had slowed, but her decision was made. She wasn't just following a trail anymore. She was going to expose it. Later that evening, as rain began to fall in uneven sheets, she returned to her usual shelter spot, but something was off. Her bag was gone. The blanket, too. Everything she'd left tucked in the corner beneath the rusted pipe had vanished. She backed away instinctively. It wasn't theft. It was too clean for that. Nothing else disturbed. No wrappers. No scattered clothes. Someone had removed it all, and deliberately. She turned on her heel and walked. Fast. 15 blocks later, she ducked into the back entrance of an abandoned laundromat she'd used once during winter. The machines were long dead. The floor was cracked tile, but it was dry. She sat in the dark, head against the wall, and tried to focus. They knew who she was. That meant Ethan was still in danger. The next morning, before the sun rose, she received a knock. Not on a door. On the front of the laundromat itself, 3 sharp taps, then silence. She didn't move. Then came a voice, muffled through the metal, "Jasmine Carter. I need to speak with you." It wasn't Langston. It wasn't Lucas. She stepped forward cautiously and opened the service door a crack. A man stood in the alley. Early 50s. Gray hair, dark suit, umbrella tucked under one arm. "I'm David Langston," he said calmly. She didn't open the door farther. "You're braver than I thought. I didn't come to threaten you." "Then what? Apologize?" Langston studied her. "You think I'm the villain? You're wrong. You authorized a stranger onto the Miller property in the middle of the night." "I did," he admitted. "But not for the reason you think." She narrowed her eyes. "I've been trying to protect Ethan," Langston said. "From people inside his father's own circle. From decisions Benjamin Miller made years ago that are finally catching up." Jasmine remained silent. "There's a splinter group," Langston continued. "Former business associates, rivals. They want leverage. They think Ethan is that leverage. And you just let them in?" "I needed to know who they were. I needed them to think I was compliant." She didn't believe him. "Not fully. Why tell me this now?" Langston's expression darkened. "Because they're done waiting." A pause. "They're planning another attempt. And this time, it won't be in public." Jasmine felt her stomach turn. "Where is he?" "Safe. For now." "Where?" Langston stepped back. "I'll send you the location. When it comes, you decide what to do with it. But be careful who you trust." Then he vanished into the rain. 5 minutes later, Jasmine's phone lit up. A single message. A GPS pin. And beneath it, one sentence. "It happens tonight." The message arrived well before dawn, a discreet vibration from Jasmine's pocket breaking the fragile stillness she had wrapped around herself. She woke slowly, senses sharp, heart pounding. The GPS pin glowed faintly on the dark screen, a location in Brooklyn she vaguely recognized, a small, suburban-style townhome converted into offices. The message beneath it read, "It happens tonight." Fear didn't stop her. It sharpened her focus. By midday, Jasmine had arranged to meet Lucas Grant in an unremarkable diner, neither too busy to raise eyebrows nor too isolated to be dangerous. She slipped into a booth, pulling from her backpack the printed image of Ethan she'd carried since the first night, along with the hastily erased message burned into her memory. Lucas arrived soon after, carrying fresh coffee and a grim expression. Without a word, she slid the phone across the table. "We've got a time and a place," she said softly. Lucas jabbed the screen, reactivating the map pin. "Tonight, here." His finger tapped the house icon. "That's deep in Brooklyn, quiet block. Off the radar." Jasmine leaned in, every muscle taut. "What then?" "What I've managed to pull," Lucas began, "suggests that this location is being used by Miller's inner circle as an interim safe house, specifically for Ethan. They might think it's secure, but they don't know the eyes watching from outside." "Because we don't match the profile," she said. "We're supposed to be outside the story." Lucas nodded. "Exactly. Your approach is invisible. If we act carefully, we can make some changes to that." Before she could ask what he meant, a waitress delivered her coffee. She stared at it for a moment, then nudged the cup away. Lucas looked at her. "You all right?" Her chest tightened. She realized she hadn't eaten in 2 days. "Just ready." They spent the next hour planning small details, which crossroads to park near, best ways to remain inconspicuous, and backup options if they were tailed. Lucas emphasized discretion, no confrontation, just observation and documentation. They both understood that this was not only about getting evidence, it was about keeping Ethan out of harm's way. By late afternoon, they were ready. The safe house stood quiet in the early evening light, wood and brick townhouse with trimmed hedges, narrow walkway, and shadows already growing. Jasmine parked several blocks away, and they walked in silence toward the location. She wore a hoodie that hid her face. Lucas carried a video camera disguised as a compact digital recorder. They watched from across the street as two dark-suited figures entered the house carrying briefcases and lit tablets, likely security personnel, maybe even Langston himself. Through the large front window, they caught a glimpse of rich carpeting and soft lighting. Nothing about this place felt normal. But there was an inconsistency. A single window on the second floor had blinds crooked, slightly parted, letting a narrow beam of light escape. And inside, against the glow of a TV screen, a small figure, Ethan. Jasmine's breath caught. Lucas whispered, "We have him." Clicks from the camera caught every movement, a door opening, a pair of figures approaching Ethan, then one turning sharply when they noticed movement outside. Even through the glass, Jasmine read the panic in the boy's posture, back turned, shoulders tense, chest raised as though he looked for an escape. Lucas coaxed her away quietly. Once safely away from the building's view, they reviewed the footage. Jasmine's stomach dropped as she saw Ethan shrink into himself, staring out a distant window. For a breathless second, their eyes met, Ethan's small, panicked gaze, and she felt something in her chest crack open. Later, they shared the video with Officer Moreno. His face turned ashen as he watched. "He's alive," he said finally. "Yes," Jasmine whispered. "But he's terrified." He handed them a secure flash drive. "This needs to be out in the open, with editorial oversight. Not social media. People with protection. Once I confirm Ethan's condition, I'll ensure his safe retrieval. But justice can't wait." By the time dusk turned to night, Jasmine walked through empty streets with a storm in her head. She thought of Ethan, alone, afraid, waiting in a place meant to hide him. That image gave her direction. Not just the adrenaline of discovery, but the hope of rescue. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucas, "Go home. Lay low. Tomorrow we move." She allowed herself to feel the exhaustion now, the weight of the past days bearing down. But beneath it, a flicker lit the dark, the knowledge that she had found the truth, and tomorrow, she would act on it. The night stretched long and silent above her, but for Jasmine Carter, sleep would not come. She had a boy to find, and a story to tell. It started with footsteps. Not loud, not rushed. Just present. Jasmine had tucked herself into a freight alcove beneath a closed discount furniture store, her bag under her head and her hoodie drawn low. She was used to the night noises, passing cars, the occasional shout, the distant sirens. But these steps were too deliberate. Too focused. And they were getting closer. Her body tensed before her brain caught up. She didn't move, didn't breathe, listening for any signal that this wasn't what it felt like. But the steps stopped right at the edge of the alcove. Then silence. She rolled, fast and low, out from her spot and into the narrow side alley. A figure lunged from the shadows behind where she'd been lying, missing her by inches. She hit the pavement hard, shoulder first, and scrambled to her feet. A second figure appeared near the entrance of the alley, blocking her way out. She didn't scream. Instead, she ran. Straight into the darkness, where she knew the terrain better. The alley curved behind the building and narrowed toward a fence that bordered an overgrown lot. Jasmine scaled it in one swift move, adrenaline replacing caution. She landed in the weeds, tore through the brush, and ducked into the broken fence on the far end. Behind her, quick footsteps followed. They were chasing her. No question. She didn't stop until she reached the loading dock of an abandoned supermarket 3 blocks away. Heart pounding, throat raw from breathing, she pressed herself against the wall, listening. Nothing. Then, voices. Distant but deliberate. She went that way. Langston said don't hurt her. Just bring her in. Jasmine's blood turned cold. They weren't random muggers. They knew who she was. And they had orders. She waited, still as stone, until their voices faded. When the silence returned, she crawled toward the fire escape and pulled herself up to the second floor, where she'd once found a shattered window that still opened. Inside, the space was pitch black and filled with dust and debris. She slid into a corner and curled into herself, trying to control her breath. She didn't have her knife. Her bag was back where she'd been sleeping. All she had was the burner phone, half battery, and the sheer will to stay alive. After 20 minutes, she finally sent a text to Lucas, 2 men. Langston's orders. They want to take me. No reply came. She powered the phone off. When morning arrived, gray and quiet, Jasmine made her way to a payphone near the post office and called Officer Marino's number from memory. No answer. Just a voicemail. She didn't leave one. Instead, she took a bus toward Queens. A cash fare with crumpled bills, no questions asked. She needed to disappear for a few hours, get clean, and regroup. She had one place left to go. An old community center turned night shelter she hadn't visited in months, not since one of the staff warned her they'd have to report her if she stayed too long. But today, she didn't want shelter. She needed a name. Maria Delgado. A volunteer nurse who used to sneak her extra bandages and warn her when the outreach teams were coming through. Jasmine hadn't seen her in nearly 6 months, but she remembered Maria saying something about her brother, a tech guy who knew how to find things without being found. Jasmine arrived mid-morning, the center nearly empty, and waited in the shadows until Maria came out the side door with an armful of supplies. Maria, Jasmine whispered. The woman turned, startled. Then softened. Jasmine? God, look at you. I need help. Maria didn't ask questions. She brought Jasmine inside, sat her in a quiet room with warm water and a first aid kit, and waited. I need someone who can trace a text. GPS tag. Secure line. Maria frowned. You in danger? Yes. And so is a kid. That was enough. She made one call. Then told Jasmine to wait. An hour later, a man named Diego arrived. early 30s, baseball cap, eyes that didn't trust anyone. He didn't introduce himself, just asked, "Where's the phone?" Jasmine handed it over. He plugged it into a small device from his backpack and worked in silence for 10 minutes. Then, this message wasn't just a pin. It was a ping relay. Whoever sent it, they weren't just giving you a location. They were tracking how long you stayed there. Possibly who you contacted after. Jasmine's stomach dropped. So it was a trap. Not exactly. More like a trigger. You walked into their net and activated something. They probably let you see the kid on purpose. Measured how you'd react. And when you didn't report to them, they sent cleanup. Which means they're planning something worse. Diego nodded. And soon. She leaned forward. Can you trace the original sender? I already did. It bounced through 3 ghost servers. But the first ping hit a tower inside Miller's corporate campus. Jasmine swore. So it came from inside. Diego disconnected the device. You've got maybe 48 hours before they try again. Maybe less. You need to either go public or vanish. She looked at Maria. Then back at Diego. I don't vanish. She took the device and the flash drive she'd copied from Lucas's camera footage and left the center with her hood up. The air outside was warmer now, but the pressure hadn't lifted. She knew what she had to do. By late afternoon, she arrived at Lucas's apartment in Harlem, an old walk-up above a bookstore, modest and quiet. She knocked once. No answer. Twice. Still nothing. She was about to leave when she noticed the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. Inside, the apartment was a mess, papers scattered, laptop gone, drawers pulled out. A sign of panic, not theft. Jasmine stepped carefully, checking every room. No blood. No body. But something had happened here. She found Lucas's phone wedged beneath the couch. Cracked. Still warm. A message on the screen glowed, "They know about the video. You're not safe. Go dark." It was sent 2 hours ago. She left the apartment and made her way to the nearest subway station, vanishing into the crowd. That night, she didn't try to sleep. Instead, she sat in an empty corner booth of a 24-hour diner, coffee going cold in front of her, flash drive in her pocket. She knew the plan had changed. She wouldn't wait for Miller's people to make the next move. She would make hers. The city's skyline shimmered with reflected headlights as Jasmine emerged from the subway just after 2 in the morning. The streets were still alive in that restless way New York never really slept, delivery trucks humming, windows glowing with television static, a few stragglers with nowhere better to be. She kept to the edge of the sidewalk, hands deep in her pockets, her eyes scanning every parked car and shadowed alley. She hadn't seen Lucas in nearly 24 hours. No contact, no messages, not even a hint of where he'd gone after his apartment was ransacked. But she still had the flash drive, and more importantly, she still had the upper hand, for now. The diner she'd spent the night in had offered temporary cover, but it was no longer safe to remain anywhere predictable. She was being followed. She could feel it, too many passing glances, too many familiar cars circling the block more than once. And while she hadn't seen Langston again, his name now clung to every step she took. She needed to find someone who could force the truth out of the shadows. And she knew exactly where to go. A few hours later, as the sky began to pale and the traffic increased with early risers heading toward Manhattan, Jasmine stood at the foot of a brownstone in Bed-Stuy that hadn't been remodeled since the 90s. The intercom barely worked. The paint was peeling from the railing. But she knew who lived here. Thomas Croft. Former intelligence consultant, now a private security analyst for high-net-worth clients, people like Benjamin Miller. Croft had left Miller's orbit years ago under hushed circumstances that never made it to public record. But Lucas had mentioned him once, in a half-whispered story about old allies who turned away when things started getting ugly. She rang the bell. Waited. Nothing. Then she pounded on the door. The sound of locks turning echoed on the other side before the door cracked open, revealing a man in his early 60s with a buzzed head, gray stubble, and eyes that had seen enough darkness to recognize when it came knocking. He didn't speak. Just stared. "Jasmine Carter," she said. "You don't know me. But you know who I'm running from." He didn't move. "You brought them to my door." "No," she replied. "They've been watching me for days. If they're here, they already know your name." His jaw tightened. "You're that girl. The one who pulled the Miller kid off the street." She nodded. He sighed and opened the door wider. 5 minutes. She stepped inside. The apartment was sparse, metal furniture, concrete floors, not a single personal photo in sight. The man lived like someone expecting trouble. Croft motioned toward a chair. "Talk." Jasmine placed the flash drive on the table between them. "It's all here. The kid's being held. The people around him, maybe even Miller himself, are using private locations to keep him isolated. There's something bigger happening. A power struggle inside the company." Croft studied her. "You think Miller's behind it?" "I think he's either blind, or pretending to be." Croft picked up the flash drive. "You have no idea how dangerous it is to sit where you are." "Then stop sitting," she said. "Help me." His laugh was dry. "You think I owe Miller something? I think you know where his enemies live. And maybe you'd like to see him fall." Croft stared at her for a long time, then finally inserted the flash drive into a secure laptop and began scrolling through the contents. Video files. Audio. Logs. Images. He paused at the footage of Ethan at the safehouse window. "I remember that hallway," he muttered. "That's not Miller's property. It's one of the old safe sites Langston used to use when things got messy." "You mean when someone needed to disappear?" Jasmine said. Croft leaned back. "Langston never got rid of his old tools. He just started using them for different people." "Then he's not a bodyguard," she said. "He's a weapon." Croft nodded. "And someone's been pulling his trigger." He stood suddenly, walked to a steel cabinet against the wall, and retrieved a file, real paper, aged and yellowed. He slid it across the table. "Miller has 2 major corporate rivals, Donovan Aerospace and Atrix Holdings. A year ago, Miller outbid Donovan for a defense contract. Days later, there were whispers of internal sabotage. Atrix helped fund the investigation, but pulled out just before the findings went public." Jasmine flipped through the file. It was filled with internal memos, press releases, and blacked-out names. But there, between the lines, was a pattern. Miller was being targeted, not by one enemy, but by a coalition of rivals working together in the shadows. And Ethan? He was leverage. The pressure point no one would admit existed. Croft sat again. Langston could be working for either side. Maybe both. He's the kind of man who serves power, not loyalty. Then Ethan's just a pawn. "No," Croft said quietly. "He's the board." Jasmine stood, her mind racing. "I need proof. Not just surveillance. Not theories. Something real." Croft rubbed his jaw. "There's a private server inside Miller Tower. Isolated. No network access. Everything that matters, every internal deal, every off-book contract, is archived there. And how do I get to it?" "You don't." "I wasn't asking permission." Croft hesitated, then finally said, "There's a man. Former IT. Fired last year after the security breach. He knows the building inside out. If he's still in the city, he might help. His name's Daniel Hayes." Jasmine scribbled the name down. "Where do I find him?" Croft smirked. "You're asking the wrong question. What's the right one? Why hasn't he disappeared already?" She left without another word. By nightfall, she was at a crumbling co-op near the Bronx Zoo, following a lead from Croft's network. The hallway stank of mildew and old smoke. Apartment 4B had a cracked doorframe and no peephole. She knocked. Nothing. Then, a whisper from behind, "Looking for someone?" She turned fast. A tall man in a faded hoodie stood at the stairwell, one hand in his jacket pocket. He didn't look surprised to see her. "You Jasmine?" "Yes. I'm Daniel. Let's walk." They stepped outside into the street, keeping their voices low. Jasmine explained what she needed: access to the server, the files, anything that could prove what Langston and his allies were doing. Daniel didn't flinch. "I can get you in. But it won't be pretty. I need a distraction." "I can do that. And once we're in, we've got 10 minutes. After that, the system triggers a full lockdown. Then we don't waste time." They agreed to meet the next night. Jasmine left him at the corner, her body humming with adrenaline. Back in Manhattan, she returned to the diner where it all began. The waitress recognized her, handed her a cup of coffee without asking. "You look tired," she said. "I'm about to be wide awake." She opened her notebook. Tomorrow, they would break into the heart of Miller Industries. And the truth, finally, would have nowhere left to hide. The rain came just before dawn, fine and cold, turning the city into a blur of headlights and reflections. Jasmine stood across from the Miller Industries tower, the collar of her jacket turned up, a knit cap pulled low over her forehead. She watched the building's upper floors disappear into the fog as the streets slowly came to life around her. Daniel Hayes arrived just before 7. He didn't speak at first, just nodded and handed her a prepaid badge disguised as a visitor's pass. "It wouldn't last long," he said. 15, maybe 20 minutes before the internal system flagged the ID. Jasmine would be inside by then. "We go through the East Service entrance," Daniel said under his breath. "There's a fire suppression drill scheduled for 8 o'clock. That gives us cover to slip past the first checkpoint. The rest depends on how fast you move." Jasmine didn't blink. "And the server?" "Basement level 3. Past the biometric checkpoint, which will bypass through the air duct. The access panel's locked, but I built the damn thing. I still know the fail code." The plan wasn't flawless. But it didn't need to be. It needed to be fast. By 8:15, Jasmine was inside. The air was sterile, humming with fluorescent light and climate control. The hallways were lined with opaque glass panels and motion sensor security doors. Nothing about this place suggested human warmth. It was a machine wearing the shape of a building. They moved with practiced steps, Daniel nodding to the right people, avoiding cameras, passing through 2 locked doors before ducking into a stairwell that led to the lower levels. Basement level 3 was colder, quieter. Fewer people worked down here, and those who did rarely stayed long. The server room wasn't marked, but Daniel stopped in front of a door with a faint hum behind it. He knelt, pried open the bottom of the wall panel, and entered a 12-digit code into the emergency console. The lock clicked. Inside, the server room felt like stepping into the core of something alive. Towers of blinking lights pulsed with stored information, corporate secrets, financial deals, private emails, things never meant for daylight. Jasmine moved fast, inserting the modified flash drive into the terminal Daniel had prepped. A series of commands scrolled across the screen as the drive pulled encrypted files from the deepest layers of the system. "What are we looking for?" Daniel asked. "Everything Langston touched. Security files. Transfer logs. Communications with Miller. I want the proof in their own words." He worked beside her, eyes darting across the data as it compiled. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Jasmine's heart pounded with each new folder that opened. Internal memos labeled Containment Procedures. A document titled OP-Rigel, Strategic Leverage Management. Dozens of timestamps matching the days Ethan was moved between locations. One file contained a detailed movement report marked Primary Asset, EM. She froze. Daniel looked over her shoulder. "That's Ethan. The file was a day-by-day log of every location Ethan had stayed in for the past 2 weeks. Not just addresses, but time logs, camera activity, staff rotations. The tone was clinical, cold. There were entries labeled Anomaly, External Contact, JC. A note from 3 days ago read, Initiate Phase 2. Ensure JC neutralized before exposure risk grows. Jasmine gripped the edge of the desk. Phase 2? She asked. Daniel shook his head. I don't like the sound of that. The screen blinked. Download complete. Then everything shut down. The lights dimmed. A low alarm started, a soft tone that would soon grow louder. Daniel swore under his breath. We triggered the firewall. They ran. Up 2 flights of stairs, past the still empty corridors of the lower levels. But by the time they reached the first floor, security was already mobilizing. Jasmine spotted a guard with a tablet checking ID flags. Her fake badge had just expired. Daniel pulled her into a side hallway. We're not going back out the way we came, he said. Jasmine pointed to a maintenance elevator. Where does that go? Loading dock. But it's monitored. I'll distract them. You take the drive and get to Lucas. Daniel hesitated. They'll come after you. They already are. He took the flash drive and nodded. If I'm not out in 20 minutes. You'll be out. She turned and ran toward the central atrium. Security was now fully activated. Guards swarmed through the upper balconies and glass-walled meeting rooms, searching, scanning. Jasmine ducked behind a sculpture, then slipped into a corridor labeled Employee Training. Inside, she found a conference room and slammed the door shut behind her, barricading it with a chair. She opened the window. The alley outside was 3 floors down. No time to hesitate. She climbed, dropped onto the metal scaffolding below, rolled once, and landed on the fire escape. Her knee throbbed, but she kept moving. She hit the alley floor seconds later and disappeared into the rain. Half an hour later, she stood outside the news office where Lucas had worked. It was locked, lights off, but she knew he was still watching, somewhere. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later, soaked but unhurt. He handed her back the drive. I left no trace, he said. But they'll know someone was there. They already knew. Back in the diner, they reviewed the files. Lucas finally appeared just after noon. His face was pale, eyes sunken. I've been in hiding, he said. They know I have footage. They've been to my family's home. Jasmine handed him the drive. Now you have more. Lucas plugged it into his laptop. As he read, his expression changed, from confusion to disbelief to something like horror. This is beyond corporate war, he said. This is organized manipulation. False narratives. Threats. Asset management protocols using a child. And it all leads back to Langston and Miller. Jasmine stared at him. Are you saying Miller knew? I'm saying he signed the final page. Lucas turned the screen so she could see. A memo, dated 1 week prior. Operation Contingency. If external actor JC attempts to interfere, deny public access to all footage, issue legal threats to media, and initiate internal cleanup protocol. Asset EM must remain controllable through psychological insulation until the acquisition with Atrix finalizes. D. Langston to oversee operational integrity. Signed, B. Miller. The truth was no longer buried. It was written in black and white. And now, it would see the light. The sky over Manhattan was an unbroken sheet of gray by the time the preparations were complete. A storm was approaching, not just the one carried by the clouds overhead, but the one Jasmine had set in motion. After days of hiding, running, collecting evidence, and watching people disappear without explanation, it was time to do what none of them had dared: speak. Lucas secured a slot at a live-streamed public press conference that had originally been organized for a corporate charity event honoring Benjamin Miller's philanthropic contributions. It was to be held in a private hall inside the Midtown Civic Center, with dozens of reporters, investors, and political figures expected. Jasmine's name was not on the guest list, but Lucas had made arrangements. The plan was simple in theory. Lucas would introduce her. Jasmine would speak. The footage, the documents, the operation files, they would be broadcast in real time through multiple news outlets, some of them still unaware of what they were about to air. Daniel Hayes had taken one final step and bypassed a proxy server that would mirror the stream onto every device connected to the center's public network. Phones, tablets, televisions, there would be no way to stop it. Still, Jasmine wasn't naive. She knew that what she was about to do wouldn't make her safe. But it would make her loud. Loud enough that silence would no longer be an option. The event began at noon. Inside the Civic Center, rows of clean white chairs faced a stage lit by warm, flattering lights. A large banner behind the podium read, "Innovation for Tomorrow, the Benjamin Miller Foundation." Cameramen moved through the crowd, capturing angles for press clips and official documentation. Jasmine stood just beyond the backstage curtain, her heart steady despite the enormity of what she was about to do. Lucas appeared beside her and adjusted the small mic pinned to her collar. "Once I introduce you, you go straight to the podium. Don't pause. Don't let anyone cut in." Jasmine nodded. "And Jasmine, once it's out, it's out. There's no going back." "I'm not trying to go back," she said. "I'm trying to stop it from ever happening again." At 12:30, Benjamin Miller took the stage to polite applause. He wore his signature navy blue suit and a perfectly rehearsed smile. For a moment, Jasmine watched him speak, eloquent, controlled, careful with every word. "I want to thank you all for your support," he said. "We've spent years building not just a business, but a legacy, one rooted in transparency, innovation, and the shared goal of building a safer world." She nearly laughed. "And today, I'm honored to introduce someone who reminds us that real courage often comes from unexpected places." He gestured off stage. Jasmine didn't move. Lucas did. He walked past Miller and stepped up to the mic before the host could stop him. The room shifted, the applause hesitated. Cameras recalibrated. "My name is Lucas Grant," he said calmly. "And I'm not on the schedule. But I have with me someone who has a story you need to hear. Not tomorrow. Not behind closed doors. Now." Murmurs rose through the room. A few hands reached for phones. A man near the back whispered something into a headset. Lucas turned. "Jasmine." She stepped out. The silence was sharp. People turned in their chairs. Some recognized her face from the local stories, "Teen saves billionaire's son," but they hadn't seen her like this. No press staging. No carefully prepared remarks. Just a girl in a plain black hoodie and jeans, walking toward the microphone like it was the only thing between her and a storm. She didn't look at Miller. She didn't need to. She stood before the room and spoke clearly. "My name is Jasmine Carter. I don't have a company. I don't have a title. I don't own anything that makes money or power or headlines. But I saw something. I stopped something. And then I learned the truth." Someone in the front row whispered. A camera shifted closer. "I was there when someone tried to take Ethan Miller off the street. I didn't know who he was. I just saw a kid who was scared. What I didn't know was that this wasn't the first time it had happened. And that the people who were supposed to protect him, some of them were the ones orchestrating it." Gasps rippled through the room. Miller stood frozen beside the curtain, unmoving. I started asking questions. And every time I got closer, someone followed me. Someone tried to silence me. I was threatened. Chased. Almost caught. Behind her, Lucas connected the laptop to the projection system. The first image appeared on the massive screen behind her, a document labeled OPRIGEL, Strategic Leverage Management. Gasps grew louder. But I wasn't the only one. There were others, employees who got fired, silenced, made to vanish. a kid locked in private rooms while his father closed billion-dollar deals. She turned slightly to face the crowd more fully. I have proof, she continued. Files from inside Miller Industries. Footage. Logs. Emails. Direct orders with signatures. Everything I say today can be verified. And every word that follows will be public before this event ends. The next slide came up, images of Ethan in the safe house, the time-stamped logs, the movement charts. Murmurs turned to outrage. Reporters stood. Phones recorded from every angle. Security began to move toward the stage. Lucas stepped in front of Jasmine. No one touches her, he said loudly. Not this time. The room was chaos now. Some shouted for Benjamin Miller to respond. Others demanded statements. The moderator tried to regain control, but Jasmine raised her voice once more, cutting through the noise. You all applauded a man who told you his company was about innovation. About trust. But the truth is, trust isn't built in glass towers. It's built when someone speaks when they're not supposed to. It's built when you do the right thing even when no one claps. She looked at Miller now. He hadn't moved. His jaw was tight, but his eyes betrayed something more complex than anger. Regret. Or maybe fear. I didn't want to be here today, Jasmine said. But someone had to be. Someone had to say it out loud. And with that, she stepped back. Lucas turned off the microphone. The projection system cut. But the damage was done. Outside, the footage was already live, on news apps, social media, even broadcast stations. Croft had distributed it through multiple servers. There would be no injunction fast enough to stop the replication. It was out. Security tried to remove her. They failed. An hour later, Jasmine stood on the courthouse steps surrounded by reporters. Ethan, now in safe custody, was being transferred to his mother's home outside the city. Langston was missing. But the Department of Justice had already launched an inquiry. Benjamin Miller issued a prepared statement of denial, but even as the cameras rolled, the cracks in his empire had begun to show. Jasmine didn't give interviews that night. She walked through the city alone, the wind pushing against her, the streets quieter than usual. She didn't feel like a hero. But she felt like someone who had finally been heard. The courthouse hallway smelled faintly of disinfectant and varnish, the kind of institutional scent that always felt like an attempt to scrub away truth. Jasmine stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the flow of journalists and legal aides swarm just outside the building. From this side of the glass, it looked almost like a parade, if parades were made of tension and long lenses. Inside, the atmosphere was quieter but no less intense. Jasmine had been told she wouldn't be allowed inside the chamber during the closed-door interview. Ethan's testimony, though crucial, was still that of a minor, and the court had chosen to keep the room clear of all non-essential personnel. Even Lucas had to wait outside. But she didn't need to hear his words to know what they would mean. For days following the public revelation, the fallout had accelerated. The files Jasmine had exposed triggered multiple investigations. The Department of Justice had frozen several of Miller Industries' strategic accounts. Shareholders began calling emergency meetings. The media frenzy hadn't relented, not since the video of Ethan in the safe house looped across national broadcasts. But despite the headlines and outrage, no one could move the case forward without the voice of the one person whose silence had defined the entire storm. Until now. The door to the courtroom finally opened. A woman in a gray blazer stepped out, whispered something to the court assistant, and disappeared down the corridor. Then, a small figure emerged into the hallway, guarded closely by two plainclothes officers. Ethan wore a navy sweater and jeans. He looked older than he had just a week ago, his shoulders stiffer, his expression subdued but not broken. He stopped when he saw Jasmine. She didn't move. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he stepped forward, looked up at her, and said, "I told them." She nodded, her throat tightening. "I know. I told them everything." "I'm proud of you," she said. You didn't have to. But you did. He glanced down, fidgeting with the sleeve of his sweater. They said it was important. That I had to say it in my own words. Did you feel safe? He hesitated. Then nodded. More than before. A marshal approached and gently guided him toward the waiting vehicle outside. Ethan looked back once before climbing in. Jasmine stood by the window again and watched the car disappear into traffic, flanked by two black SUVs. It was the first time she felt a real sense of distance between them, and the first time she accepted it was necessary. Later that afternoon, Officer Moreno invited her into a conference room with Elise Harmon and a federal prosecutor whose presence alone confirmed how serious the investigation had become. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 40s, gestured to the seat across from her. Jasmine, we appreciate everything you've done. What you risked. What you endured. But we need to talk about what comes next. Jasmine didn't flinch. I'm not backing out. I didn't expect you to. But we're going to court. There will be trials. Depositions. Testimonies. And they're going to come after your credibility. I don't have much to lose. On the contrary, Elise said softly. You've become a symbol. People are listening. That makes you dangerous to the ones who want this buried. Moreno placed a document in front of her. We'll keep you protected. For as long as necessary. Jasmine didn't touch the paper. Is Ethan safe now? Yes, the prosecutor confirmed. He's in protective custody with his mother's legal team overseeing the transition. Langston hasn't resurfaced. But the FBI has flagged his known aliases. He won't be able to move freely. And Miller? The room was silent. Finally, Elise said, he hasn't been arrested, yet. But his signature is on too many of those files to ignore. Once we verify the integrity of Ethan's testimony with the digital evidence you provided, we'll have grounds. Jasmine stared at them all. You're not fast enough. We're being thorough, the prosecutor corrected. And when we strike, it'll be complete. She signed the witness cooperation form, handed it back, and stood. I'm not going to hide, she said. No one's asking you to, Moreno replied. But don't go looking for him. Langston's still out there. I'm not looking for him, she said as she walked out. I'm watching for him. That evening, Jasmine returned to the community shelter, not to sleep, but to speak. A few of the younger teens had asked if she would come back, now that her face was everywhere. Some didn't believe the story. Others thought she was crazy to take on someone like Miller. She sat on the floor with them, just like she used to, and listened more than she talked. One of the girls, maybe 13, asked her, "Are you famous now?" Jasmine smiled. "No. Just visible." "Is that better?" "It depends on who's looking." The girl frowned. "Aren't you scared?" Jasmine thought about it. "Yes. But scared doesn't mean weak. And what if they come for you again?" "Then I won't be alone," she said, glancing around the room. "Not anymore." She spent the next day working with Lucas on a longer editorial piece, one that would tell the full story, not just the scandal, but the human parts. The way fear lingers. The way courage doesn't always feel like a decision, but like a necessity. They outlined a podcast series, short documentary pieces, and a call for former Miller Industries employees to come forward anonymously. And they did. Within 48 hours, 3 ex-staffers reached out with private recordings, memos, and testimonies. One of them, an HR manager, admitted to handling payouts meant to silence whistleblowers. Another shared a security video of Langston training contractors in containment tactics. The third sent a confidential contract addendum signed by Miller himself, acknowledging the use of psychological insulation protocols for minors under the company's care. Ethan's voice had unlocked a floodgate. Jasmine reviewed each file carefully, methodically. She wasn't just reacting anymore. She was building something permanent, a record they couldn't erase. Still, each night, she slept lightly. Still, she kept a packed bag by the door. Still, she checked the faces around her twice. Langston hadn't reappeared. But Jasmine knew better than to believe he was gone. He was watching. Waiting. But so was she. 3 months later, the wind that once bit through Jasmine's coat now carried a softer edge. New York had started to shift into spring, and with it came a slower rhythm. The headlines were no longer hers, at least not daily. They had moved on to other scandals, other names. But beneath the surface, everything had changed, and nothing had been forgotten. The trial of Benjamin Miller was set to begin in the summer. He was no longer a fixture at public events, no longer standing behind podiums surrounded by flashing cameras. Since the federal charges were unsealed, he had remained in seclusion at one of his Connecticut properties, awaiting arraignment under strict court supervision. His empire was fractured, his public support reduced to a few loyalists clinging to the last strings of influence. The man once considered untouchable was now just another defendant with too many lawyers and too few defenses. Langston had not been caught. Despite weeks of manhunts, leaked sightings, and international alerts, David Langston remained a shadow. Federal authorities believed he had fled the country under an alias, possibly with help from offshore connections made during his private security years. His face appeared intermittently on watch lists and news reports, but no one could say for certain where he had gone, or if he ever intended to return. Jasmine knew he would. People like Langston didn't disappear. They recalibrated. She no longer lived on the streets. Through the coordinated effort of Elise Harmon and Officer Moreno, and with pressure from public attention, Jasmine was placed into a temporary foster care arrangement with a retired school counselor in Queens named Eleanor Browning. Eleanor was stern but fair, and her apartment smelled like old books and warm stew. Jasmine had her own room for the first time in years. A door she could close. A window she could leave open. At 17, she returned to school under a new academic support program piloted in the wake of her story. The media had wanted her to become a face for change, a poster child for reform. But Jasmine had refused every paid appearance, every PR opportunity, every attempt to sell her story as entertainment. She gave one interview, just one, through Lucas's platform. It was raw, honest, and final. She didn't want fame. She wanted impact. Ethan visited once a week, accompanied by a federal social worker. He had been enrolled in a new school, under a different name, far from the skyscrapers that had loomed over his old life. His mother, once estranged, now kept him close, and though he didn't say much about what he remembered, Jasmine could tell he was healing. During their visits, they talked about small things. Music. Books. Whether pineapple belonged on pizza. Never about Miller. Never about Langston. It was unspoken, but understood, they were each other's anchor in a story that had threatened to unmake them both. On one of those visits, sitting on a park bench surrounded by early cherry blossoms, Ethan looked up and asked, "Do you ever miss it?" "Miss what?" Jasmine replied. "Before," he said. "When it wasn't complicated." She gave it a moment. "It was always complicated. We just didn't know the names yet." He thought about that for a while, then nodded. "Are you still scared?" he asked. Jasmine looked out at the families walking through the park, at the vendors setting up carts, at the skyline far in the distance. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I'm not waiting for the fear to end. I'm moving through it." That night, she opened the notebook she had carried for months and turned to the final page. The top was blank. The rest of the pages were filled with timelines, names, locations, handwritten copies of documents, things she never wanted to forget. On that blank page, she wrote one sentence. "That day, I carried a knife, but I chose not to use it." She closed the notebook and tucked it into a drawer. It didn't need to be her shield anymore. The city was still messy. Still unforgiving. But for the first time in her life, Jasmine felt like she had a place in it, not as a hero, not as a victim, but as someone who had chosen not to walk away. 1 week later, she stood on a small stage at a local youth center. The room wasn't full. Maybe 30 kids. Some too young to understand what she had done. Some who knew exactly what it meant. She wasn't there to relive the story. She was there to listen. After the talk, a boy no older than 12 came up and said, "If it happens to me, should I do what you did?" She didn't answer right away. "Then, you should trust what you see. And if no one listens, say it louder. Someone always hears." He nodded and slipped away. Jasmine stepped outside, the air soft with the promise of rain. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lucas. "They're airing the documentary. It's done. You sure you don't want your name on it?" She typed her reply slowly. "Leave my name. But not my silence." And then she walked on, blending into the crowd, not as someone running, but as someone who had already stopped. She had faced the system. She had held the truth. And she had given it a voice that would never again be silenced. The story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone watching. It belonged to the next Jasmine. And the one after that.